Supply and demand. The idea of supply and demand is an economic model that determines how prices are set for a good in what's called the free market. So to understand supply and demand, we need to learn how we think about supply, what it means, how we think about demand, what that means, and how these interact. So we start with the law of supply. So the law of supply is going to describe the relationship between the quantities that the producer will make and sell depending on a certain price. As I just talked about, this should be an increasing function because again, the higher the price they can charge, the more they are willing to produce. Therefore, when we see a supply function, we're expecting something that is increasing. Now, you'll notice on the vertical axis that there's one point where our function intersects the vertical axis. We call this P naught or P sub 0. So it's a P with a little 0 subscript. And that's the price that the quantity supplied will be 0. So at some point, the price is so low that the manufacturer says, we're not going to make any because it's not worth it to us. So that price, when it's just too low, is where we intersect the axis, and it's called P sub 0. So now let's talk about the law of demand. The law of demand, when we think about it, is thought of from the consumer side. So think about when you want to buy something. So the relationship for demand here is that the higher the price, the less we're going to demand. So as the price falls or goes down, people are willing to buy more quantity of that good. So think about buying a new car. If new cars come out and they only cost $1,000 each, which is a great price, you might be willing to buy 2 or 3 because maybe you've saved up some money and you're going to buy one for yourself and maybe a friend. However, if the price of a car goes up to $100,000, you might not buy any. So thinking about the demand, you need to think of it from the consumer standpoint. So again, the higher the price, the less that we're going to be willing to demand. Remember, quantity Q is along the x-axis. So when we look at this model of demand, we see a decreasing function. So this particular function, which is given in red, models a general idea of what happens with demand in terms of price. So the law of demand specifically says that the higher the price of the good, the less people will demand that good. Therefore, the higher price, the lower the quantity demanded. So people are going to avoid buying a product that's going to force them to forego buying something else that they find more valuable. There's 2 points that we intersect on the demand function. So one is on the vertical axis. We call that P sub 1. Right? So P with a 1 subscript. And that's the price that no goods will be bought. So Q will equal 0. So for every item, there's a high price that nobody will buy it. So even if cars were $100,000, someone might buy it if it's a nice car. But if a car came out and it was $1 billion, maybe no one will buy it. So there's a high price for every item, which none will be sold. The other intersection point is Q sub 1. So this is on the quantity axis, which is the horizontal axis. And Q sub 1 is the quantity that is demanded if the good is free. So if one day cars were being given away for free, you certainly would take some. However, there's only so many that you can take. So there's an upper limit on that. When things are given away for free, how many will be demanded? And that's indicated by Q sub 1. So now we have to look at how the law of supply and the law of demand interact. So in our economy, supply and demand are happening at the same time. Manufacturers are trying to decide how many items to make, and consumers are deciding how many to buy. The idea in economics is that in a free market, when supply and demand are plotted on the same grid, we can figure out where they intersect, and that is called the equilibrium point. The equilibrium point is when the allocation of goods is the most efficient because the amount of goods that is being produced and supplied is the same number of goods that are being demanded. So everyone is satisfied with the economic conditions. So this equilibrium price is where the market will eventually settle for a particular good. Again, this is where these functions intersect. So when we're at the intersection point, the price is called P star. So it's P raised to a little star. That's the equilibrium price of a good. And then on the quantity side, the quantity that'll be demanded is Q star. That's the equilibrium quantity. So the equilibrium point is something that we are interested in because this is where the market will settle for any particular good. So we can use this equilibrium point to try to figure out and make predictions about where an item will settle, how much it'll cost, how many will be supplied, and we'll use this model as a basis for some of the other work we'll be doing.